What happens when America's most talked about former royal sits down with one of television's most trusted journalists? At first, it looks like a polished morning show segment, bright smiles, polite exchanges, and a studio bathed in CBS's signature orange and blue glow. But beneath the calm surface, sparks are waiting. With each question, the temperature rises. Meghan's replies grow sharper, and Gayle's patience is tested. By the time the conversation derails, viewers will be left stunned, wondering if they just witnessed one of the most dramatic confrontations in morning TV history. The CBS morning studio buzzed with its usual energy. Crew members shuffled silently in the background. Cameras rolled smoothly into position, and the giant screens glowed with the familiar orange and blue backdrop millions of Americans had come to associate with their morning routine. Gayle King, elegant as ever and her trademark poise, sat with her notes neatly arranged. Her voice, calm but commanding, was the anchor of the broadcast. Across from her sat Meghan Markle, dressed in a fitted navy blazer over a cream blouse, her hair cascading in soft waves. Her posture was upright, deliberate, exuding control and confidence. To the casual viewer, Meghan looked every bit the polished guest ready to promote her latest philanthropic project. "Meghan, thank you so much for being here with us this morning," Gayle began warmly, her smile radiating across the studio. "I know you've been working on a new initiative, and I think our viewers are excited to hear more about it." Meghan returned the smile, though hers felt calculated, precise, as though each expression had been rehearsed in front of a mirror. "It's always a pleasure, Gayle," she said, her voice silky, polished. "This initiative is about bringing global awareness to issues people often ignore. It's about using my platform to highlight what truly matters." Gayle nodded approvingly. "That sounds powerful. Can you share what personally inspired you to take this on?" For a brief moment, Meghan's tone softened. She spoke about compassion, about wanting to make the world a better place. The audience nodded along, some clapping politely. It all seemed exactly as CBS producers had planned. Uplifting, humanizing, hopeful. But Gayle, seasoned in the art of journalism, shifted slightly in her seat. Her warm smile never faltered, but her eyes sharpened. She leaned in just a touch, the way she always did when she was about to pivot into deeper waters. "Meghan," Gayle said smoothly, "you've spoken often about your personal truth. But there are people who question the consistency of your story. For example, when you told Oprah that you and Harry had a private wedding ceremony before the official one, the Archbishop himself later contradicted that. How do you reconcile that difference?" The air in the studio changed almost instantly. Meghan's smile tightened, just a flicker, but enough for viewers at home to notice. She adjusted the sleeve of her blazer before answering. "Well, Gayle," she said, her voice now edged with something cooler, sharper, "I find it interesting how people latch on to technicalities instead of the emotional reality of what was shared. What Harry and I experienced was sacred to us. Whether others choose to nitpick the details doesn't change our truth." Gayle gave a measured nod, keeping her composure. "I understand. But some might say that truth should be universal, not just personal, especially when it's shared on such a public stage." A faint, dismissive laugh escaped Meghan's lips. "With all due respect, Gayle, you weren't there. Neither was the Archbishop in every moment of our private lives. It's easy to comment from the outside. But you didn't live it." The audience shifted uncomfortably. It was subtle, but the air of morning show pleasantries had started to evaporate. Meghan's tone, slightly elevated, carried a quiet arrogance that made Gayle's brow furrow almost imperceptibly. Still, Gayle pressed on with grace. "Fair point. But let's also consider another example. You've said in interviews that you received no media training at all before stepping into royal life. Yet palace insiders have claimed that you had extensive briefings. Would you say they're lying?" This time, Meghan didn't bother with a soft smile. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Palace insiders," she repeated with a trace of disdain. "Anonymous voices who built their entire careers on protecting an outdated institution. Forgive me if I don't validate their narratives. I lived through it, Gayle. I know the truth." There it was again, that edge, that tone that placed her above the questions, above the accountability. Meghan wasn't just answering. She was dismissing, brushing aside Gayle's words like the buzzing of an insect. Gayle inhaled slowly, keeping her expression neutral. Years of live television had taught her the art of patience, of calm under fire. But inside, she felt the first sparks of tension ignite. She glanced at the clock, knowing they still had segments to fill, and wondered silently if this was about to become far more than the producers had bargained for. The audience could feel it too. The polite applause from earlier had stopped. Viewers at home would later describe the shift as palpable, the sense that something was about to snap. Gayle moved her pen across her notes, steadying her own rhythm. She had more questions, questions that couldn't be avoided. Meghan, for her part, leaned back slightly in her chair, her chin lifted ever so slightly, her body language daring Gayle to push further. The calm before the storm had passed. The storm itself was only just beginning. The studio lights burned hotter, or maybe it only felt that way. Meghan sat back with the poise of a duchess on a throne, fingers delicately laced in her lap, chin tilted at just the right angle. Gayle King, ever the professional, maintained her practiced warmth, but beneath it there was steel. She knew the energy had shifted. The conversation was no longer just about Meghan's philanthropic work. It had become a test of patience, and Gayle was determined not to lose her footing. "So Meghan," Gayle began softly, choosing her words carefully, "in your Oprah interview you mentioned feeling isolated and unsupported during your pregnancy. You even said you were denied mental health assistance. But some former palace staff insist that resources were available to you. How do you respond to that?" Meghan's eyes hardened, though she smiled faintly as if addressing an inferior. "Gayle, it's very easy for people to rewrite history when they've never lived my life. People love to act as if they know what happened behind closed doors. But the reality is, I was there. I was the one left to suffer. If others claim otherwise, well, perhaps they're more concerned with protecting the monarchy than telling the truth." Her tone was syrupy but laced with poison. There was no humility, only condescension. Gayle nodded politely but pressed again. "I understand. But wouldn't you agree that when multiple accounts exist, people are going to question the accuracy of your version? They'll want consistency." Meghan gave a sharp laugh, almost theatrical. "Consistency? Gayle, the only thing consistent has been the smear campaign against me. I've dealt with lies, distortions, and half-truths for years. The fact that anyone expects me to explain myself to anonymous sources is laughable. Perhaps they should spend less time whispering to the press and more time reflecting on their own failures." There was a stir in the studio audience. Meghan's words weren't the polished PR answers people expected on a morning show. They were biting, haughty. Her voice dripped with disdain, as though she were scolding the very idea of accountability. Gayle inhaled deeply, steadying herself. Her training told her to stay composed, but Meghan's smug dismissal pressed on her patience like a weight. She moved her note cards deliberately, buying herself a beat before continuing. "All right," Gayle said, her voice calm but firmer now. "Let's pivot slightly. You've often said you wanted to step away from the royal family to live a more private life, yet you've written books, filmed documentaries, and given several high-profile interviews. How do you reconcile the desire for privacy with such a public presence?" Meghan's smile sharpened into something icy. "Gayle, privacy doesn't mean silence. Privacy means having control over what we share. Just because I refuse to be silenced by the palace or the media doesn't mean I've forfeited my right to privacy. Frankly, I find the question rather insulting. I don't need to justify my choices to anyone, least of all to critics who thrive on hypocrisy." The audience murmured again. This was no longer a guest promoting a charitable project. This was a woman on the offensive, swatting down every question as if it were beneath her. Gayle tilted her head, her voice still measured. "I'm not trying to be insulting, Meghan. I'm just trying to understand the balance you're describing." Meghan's reply was swift, cutting. "Then perhaps you should try harder, Gayle. Because what you're implying, that my husband and I somehow don't deserve to tell our story, is absurd. The fact that I even have to explain this shows how entrenched the bias still is." Gasps rippled through the studio. The arrogance in Meghan's tone was unmistakable now. She wasn't just answering. She was lecturing, dismissing, towering above the questions as though Gayle herself were the one on trial. Gayle's eyes flickered, the first real crack in her serene mask. She pressed her palms together, her voice even but tinged with steel. I hear you, Meghan, but I also think viewers want clarity. These aren't just criticisms from the palace. These are questions people genuinely have. Meghan leaned forward slightly, her posture regal, her voice heavy with superiority. And maybe the public should stop expecting me to spoon-feed them answers to every petty doubt. My life is not a public court case. I don't owe anyone, palace staff, critics, or even viewers, an explanation for my choices. The words landed with a thud. Even Gayle seemed momentarily taken aback. The audacity was breathtaking. For a brief second, the control room debated cutting to commercial, but the producers knew what they were witnessing. Television lightning. Gayle adjusted her glasses, her voice still calm but now with an unmistakable edge. I respect that you feel you don't owe explanations. But when you make powerful public statements that shape how millions view one of the world's oldest institutions, people are going to ask questions. That's not bias, that's journalism. Meghan tilted her head, her lips curving into a smirk. And I respect that you think you're doing journalism, Gayle. But let's be honest, this isn't about truth, it's about entertainment. And if what you wanted was a spectacle, then congratulations, you've got it. The audience gasped audibly. For a heartbeat, the studio fell into silence. Gayle's expression remained outwardly calm, but the fire in her eyes betrayed her patience thinning. She had interviewed presidents, survivors, and world leaders. Never had she been so brazenly condescended to on her own set. Still, she kept her voice steady. We're here for an honest conversation, Meghan. That's all. Meghan leaned back, crossing her arms, her smirk unshaken. Then perhaps you should learn how to ask honest questions instead of parroting palace spin. The insult hung heavy in the air. Gayle's composure held, but the storm was building. Viewers at home could feel it. The audience in the studio shifted uneasily. The calm, controlled Gayle King was nearing her limit, and Meghan, blind to the rising tension, continued to play the role of the untouchable Duchess. The cracks were no longer hairline fractures. They were widening, and soon something would snap. The studio had slipped into an uneasy rhythm. Every question from Gayle King was calm, measured, even gentle. Every answer from Meghan Markle was sharp-edged, dismissive, or laced with superiority. It was a chess match, but one in which Meghan refused to play by the rules, knocking over pieces whenever she felt cornered. Gayle, seasoned as she was, continued to hold her composure. But inside, her patience was wearing thin. She'd interviewed presidents who handled tough questions with more grace than this. She had faced world leaders, CEOs, and celebrities who'd bristled under scrutiny. But Meghan's smug condescension was in a category of its own. So Meghan, Gayle said softly, choosing her words with care, you've often spoken about wanting to focus on service. Could you share what service means to you now outside the monarchy? Meghan let out a small laugh, shaking her head as if the question were beneath her. Gayle, I think it's obvious. Service is about impact, not titles, something I've been trying to explain for years. The fact that people still need me to define it shows how far behind society is. Her tone was cutting, her body language closed off. She leaned back in the chair, arms crossed, chin lifted. Gayle nodded slowly, acknowledging the answer, but pressing gently. I hear you. But some would say that your actions, books, documentaries, interviews, seem more focused on telling your personal story than serving others. How do you respond to that perception? Meghan's smirk returned. Perception is shaped by bias, Gayle. People who are determined to see me as self-serving will never recognize the work I've done. It's not my job to correct their ignorance. The audience murmured again, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Meghan's words landed like slaps, directed not just at Gayle, but at anyone who dared to question her. Gayle's eyes flickered, but her voice remained smooth. I understand, Meghan. But let's talk specifics. Your new project, how does it differ from previous initiatives? Meghan waved her hand dismissively, as if brushing away an unimportant detail. It's not about being different. It's about building on the legacy I've already created. Honestly, I sometimes feel these questions are redundant. My record speaks for itself. A quiet gasp rolled through the studio. Meghan hadn't just dismissed the question. She had dismissed Gayle. For a long second, Gayle simply stared at her guest. She pressed her lips together, taking a deliberate breath. She had been patient, professional, empathetic. But Meghan's arrogance had crossed into disrespect. Still, Gayle tried one more time to steady the tone. Meghan, I think our viewers appreciate details. They want to understand not just what you're doing, but why. Can you share an example? Meghan rolled her eyes subtly, but enough for the cameras to catch it. Gayle, with all due respect, I didn't come here to repeat bullet points like a press release. If people are truly interested, they can read about it on our website. I don't need to spoon-feed information. The audience gasped audibly this time. Gayle's hand tightened around her note cards, but her voice remained calm. I see. Well, some might argue that when you appear on national television, the expectation is that you'll share those details with the public directly. That's part of accountability. Meghan leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. Accountability? I've been held accountable every single day of my life since I married into that family. If anything, I've been scrutinized far more than anyone else. So forgive me if I don't feel the need to bend over backwards to satisfy critics who will never support me anyway. The dismissiveness in her voice was like a spark in a room filled with gasoline. Gayle sat up straighter, her professional mask beginning to crack. Meghan, Gayle said, her voice firmer now, I'm not your critic. I'm doing my job. My viewers expect me to ask questions that matter. And frankly, your tone right now, she stopped herself, choosing restraint, doesn't make it easy for people to see the sincerity of your message. Meghan laughed again, a cold, dismissive sound. Maybe that's because sincerity makes people uncomfortable, Gayle. Maybe you and your viewers simply aren't ready for someone who refuses to play the game. The words sliced through the air like knives. The audience shifted again, restless. Some looked sympathetic to Gayle, others shocked at Meghan's audacity. Gayle placed her notes down on the table slowly, deliberately. For the first time, she locked eyes with Meghan and allowed a flash of irritation to show. Meghan, nobody's asking you to play a game. What they're asking for is respect. Respect for the questions, respect for the audience, respect for the platform you're using. Meghan smirked again, her voice dripping with superiority. And maybe, Gayle, respect should be mutual. The studio went dead silent. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Gayle sat perfectly still, her hands folded, but the fire in her eyes betrayed that the breaking point was near. She had tried patience. She had tried empathy. But Meghan's arrogance had become unbearable. The calm veneer of CBS mornings was on the verge of shattering. The storm that had been building since the first question was ready to break wide open, and everyone in the studio could feel it coming. The air in the CBS studio was electric, charged with a tension that could no longer be disguised. Meghan Markle sat with arms crossed, her chin lifted as if she were presiding over the room, not a guest in it. Gayle King, papers now resting untouched on the desk before her, leaned slightly forward, her tone finally stripped of the careful gentleness she'd maintained all morning. Meghan, Gayle said, her voice low but firm, you've made it very clear that you feel misunderstood, even attacked. But let me tell you something. Sitting here, the way you've spoken to me, to this audience, it doesn't come across as strength, it comes across as arrogance. The audience gasped. Meghan blinked rapidly, her composure cracking. Excuse me, she said, her voice sharp. Gayle held her gaze, her voice steady and commanding. You've dismissed every question I've asked. You've rolled your eyes. You've implied that the people watching at home are ignorant if they don't immediately agree with you. That's not the voice of a leader or a change maker. That's the voice of a spoiled child who thinks the world owes her something. A shocked silence gripped the studio. Meghan's lips trembled as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. Her hand gripped the armrest tightly. How dare you? Meghan began, but Gayle cut her off, her own patience finally gone. No, Meghan, how dare you? How dare you come on this set, ask for a platform, and then insult the very people you claim to serve? How dare you paint yourself as a victim while dismissing every attempt at accountability as bias or conspiracy? You act as though the world is against you, when in truth, the world has given you opportunities most can only dream of. Meghan's face flushed red, her eyes glistening. She tried to hold her posture, but Gayle's words were hammering against the carefully built walls of her composure. You talk about hating the monarchy, Gayle pressed on, her voice rising. And yet you cling to the Duchess title every chance you get. You talk about service, but your projects are eclipsed by your own narrative. And let's be very clear, Meghan, if you were not married to Prince Harry, none of this would even exist. The audience gasped again, this time louder. Meghan's breath caught in her throat. Gayle stood now, her voice carrying the full authority of decades in journalism. You act like you're still in the palace, as if the world owes you deference because you were once part of that family. But here's the truth. You're not in the palace anymore. You're not above accountability. And right now, on this stage, you're not acting like a duchess. You're acting like a petulant little girl stamping her feet because she can't have her way. Meghan's eyes filled with tears, her hand moving to her face as if to shield herself from the cameras. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Gayle said, her tone sharper now. I understand that this isn't about racism or protocols or mental health anymore. This is about jealousy. This is about the fact that you wanted to be Kate and William. You wanted their respect, their popularity, their role. And when you realized you couldn't have it, you decided to burn the whole house down on your way out. Meghan let out a choked sob. The words landed with devastating weight, breaking through her armor at last. She stood suddenly, her chair scraping loudly against the studio floor. This is unacceptable, she stammered, tears streaming down her cheeks. I don't have to take this. Gayle, standing firm, didn't flinch. Then don't. If you can't handle being asked the questions everyone else is too afraid to ask, then maybe you shouldn't be sitting in that chair. Maybe you should stop pretending you want to serve others when it's clear you only want to serve yourself. Meghan grabbed her purse, her shoulders shaking, and turned toward the exit. The cameras captured every trembling step, the tears glistening on her cheeks as she stormed off the set. The studio was silent except for the echo of her heels on the polished floor. The moment the door closed behind her, the audience erupted into stunned whispers. Some looked at Gayle in admiration, others in shock, but no one could deny they had just witnessed a moment of television history. Gayle stood tall, her voice calm once again as she turned to the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, this is live television. Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, but it still matters. The director cut to commercial, but the damage and the legacy of that explosive exchange was already written. Meghan Markle had come to promote a project, but left in tears, her image bruised, her arrogance laid bare. And Gayle King, who had tried for so long to stay composed, had finally unleashed the words millions had wanted to say. It was over. The interview that started as routine morning television had ended as one of the most unforgettable clashes in broadcast history. And that's how a routine morning show turned into one of the most explosive confrontations in television history. Meghan walked off in tears, and Gayle King's words echoed across the media world. But now, we want to hear from you. Was Gayle right to finally call Meghan out, or did she go too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want more dramatic showdowns like this, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you never miss a moment.